Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. The cruise was supposed to be our fresh start. Just me and my 6-year-old son Noah, sailing away from the messy divorce that had consumed the last 18 months of our lives. I'd saved for this trip for almost 2 years, picking up extra shifts at the hospital where I worked as a nurse, squirreling away every overtime dollar into a jar labeled New Beginnings. We boarded the ship in Miami on a humid Saturday morning in July 2018, and I remember thinking how massive the vessel looked from the dock. 12 decks of gleaming white metal and glass, with pools and restaurants and enough activities to keep Noah entertained for our 7-day Caribbean adventure. The other passengers seemed like typical cruise folks, families with kids, elderly couples celebrating anniversaries, honeymooners taking selfies against the railings. Noah was practically vibrating with excitement, clutching his little backpack with his Nintendo DS, and asking me every 5 minutes when we could go to the water slides. The first day was perfect, exactly what I'd imagined when I booked this trip. We explored the ship from top to bottom, Noah's eyes going wide at the rock-climbing wall, the mini golf course, the ice cream parlor that stayed open until midnight. We ate dinner at the buffet where he piled his plate high with mac and cheese and chocolate cake. And I didn't even scold him about vegetables because we were on vacation, damn it. And he deserved to just be a kid after everything he'd witnessed during the divorce proceedings. That night, after tucking him into the bottom bunk in our tiny interior cabin, I stood in our bathroom the size of a closet and looked at myself in the mirror. My brown hair was already getting lighter from just one day in the sun, and for the first time in forever, the bags under my eyes didn't look quite so dark. I actually felt hopeful. The ship's gentle rocking was soothing, and the hum of the engines created white noise that made Noah sleep deeper than he had in months. I fell asleep thinking about the snorkeling excursion we'd booked for Grand Cayman, imagining Noah's face when he saw tropical fish for the first time. Everything shifted on day 2. It started with something small, an announcement over the ship's PA system during breakfast. "Attention passengers, would young Sofia Martinez please report to guest services on deck 4? Sofia Martinez to guest services." Noah was busy drowning his pancakes in syrup while I sipped my coffee, watching the ocean through the dining room's massive windows. 10 minutes later, another announcement. "Christopher Johnson, please report to guest services." Christopher Johnson, 8 years old, wearing a blue Captain America shirt. That detail stuck with me. Why would they describe what the kid was wearing? I figured maybe the child was lost and they were helping the parents locate them. But then 20 minutes passed and another name was called. Isabella Thompson, 7 years old, last seen near the splash zone on deck 11. The woman at the table next to us, traveling with her 3 kids, caught my eye and shrugged. "Busy morning for lost kids," she said with a nervous laugh. I nodded, but something was gnawing at me. In my 12 years working pediatric nursing, I'd developed a 6th sense for when things weren't right with children. By lunchtime, they'd called 6 more names, always children between ages 5 and 9. Always with those specific details, what they were wearing, where they were last seen. But here's what made my pulse quicken. I never saw any of these kids being reunited with their families. Not once did I witness a relieved parent hugging their lost child near guest services. I started paying attention, really watching. The pool deck was packed with families, kids running around with soft-serve cones dripping down their arms, parents lounging on deck chairs slathered in sunscreen. But I began noticing other things too. There were staff members who didn't quite fit, men in cruise uniforms who weren't serving drinks or cleaning or leading activities. They were just watching. One guy in particular, tall and thin with acne scars across his cheeks, kept walking the same route around the main pool, his eyes scanning the crowd. He wore a legitimate crew badge, but something about how he moved set off every alarm in my head. When Noah asked if he could go down the water slide alone, it was just a short walk from where I was sitting. I heard myself saying no, even though normally I would have let him. "But Mom, I'm not a baby," he whined. I pulled him closer and told him we'd go together in a few minutes. That afternoon, we were at the kids' club entrance on Deck 7. Noah wanted to join the treasure hunt activity, and I figured it would be safe. It was a supervised program in an enclosed space with security check-in. While I was filling out the permission form, a man approached us. He was maybe 40, clean-shaven, wearing the cruise line's bright yellow kids' club staff shirt with a name tag that read Kevin. But his shirt was too new, still had the fold creases from the package, and his name tag was slightly crooked. "Hey there, buddy," he said to Noah, completely ignoring me at first. "You here for the treasure hunt?" "Actually, we moved it to the arcade on Deck 12. Way cooler prizes up there. Want me to take you?" Noah's face lit up. He'd been begging to go to the arcade since we boarded. He took a step toward the man, and that's when my body reacted before my brain. I grabbed Noah's shoulder, probably harder than necessary. "We'll go together," I said, my voice coming out sharp. The man's friendly expression flickered for just a second, a flash of irritation, maybe anger, before the smile returned. "Oh, parents aren't allowed in this special event. Insurance reasons. But I promise he'll have a blast." The real kids' club supervisor, a young woman with a Brazilian accent, looked up from her desk. "Kevin? I don't know any Kevin. And the treasure hunt is right here, ma'am, in our main room." The man didn't run. That's what chilled me the most. He just walked away, casually, like nothing had happened. The supervisor called security, but by the time they arrived, he'd vanished into the maze of corridors and decks. Security took my statement, said they'd look into it, but their tone suggested this was just another paranoid parent overreacting. Noah was upset that we left without doing the treasure hunt, but I couldn't get my heart rate back to normal. I kept replaying the moment. How quickly Noah had been ready to go with this stranger. How the man knew exactly what would appeal to my son. We went back to our cabin, and I locked the door, putting the chain on, even though I knew it was probably useless. I let Noah play his DS while I sat on my bunk, trying to process what had almost happened. The announcements continued over the PA system. "Madison Walker, 9 years old. Please report to guest services." Every time I held Noah a little tighter. I started a list in my phone, writing down every name they called, the times, the descriptions. By dinner time, I had 14 names. 14 children whose names echoed through the ship's speakers, but who never seemed to materialize anywhere. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the ship, every footstep in the hallway outside made me sit up in the dark. Noah was out cold, but I kept checking on him, making sure he was still there in his bunk. Around 3 a.m. I heard voices in the corridor, hushed but urgent. I pressed my ear against the door and caught fragments. "Cozumel tomorrow. Easier at the port. The Mexican contact." Then footsteps moving away. I wanted to open the door, see who it was, but I couldn't risk leaving Noah alone, not even for a second. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the floor between his bunk and the door, my phone in one hand and the cabin phone in the other, ready to call security at the slightest sound. The next morning I was exhausted but wired on adrenaline. At breakfast I started talking to other parents, casually at first. "Hey, did you hear all those announcements yesterday? So many lost kids." Most hadn't really noticed. They were on vacation, drinks flowing, kids in various programs. But one mother, a pediatrician from Dallas named Jennifer, had noticed. She pulled me aside near the omelet station. "My daughter's friend from the teen club said she saw security footage being reviewed yesterday. 3 kids who were called over the PA were seen leaving the ship at Nassau Port with adults who weren't their parents. The staff told her it was a custody dispute thing, but..." She glanced around nervously. "Those kids' families never reported them missing." I asked at guest services. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. These weren't just announcements. They were shopping lists. Someone was using the PA system to mark targets, maybe to signal accomplices. The more I thought about it, the more it made horrible sense. International waters meant murky jurisdiction. ports in developing countries where documentation might be lax, a ship with thousands of passengers where kids naturally wandered off from parents. It was a perfect hunting ground. Jennifer and I exchanged numbers, promised to watch each other's kids, but I knew that wasn't enough. We were heading to Cozumel that day, the words I'd heard in the hallway suddenly taking on new meaning. I made a decision. We weren't leaving the cabin. I told Noah I wasn't feeling well, and miracle of miracles, he didn't argue much. Maybe he sensed my fear. We stayed locked in that tiny room, eating room service, watching movies on my laptop. But the announcements continued. Timothy Brooks, 6 years old, blue swimsuit, last seen near the mini golf course. Each name felt like a countdown to something terrible. The breaking point came on day 4. We'd stayed holed up through the Cozumel port day, but Noah was getting restless, crying about missing everything fun. Against my better judgment, I agreed to take him to the breakfast buffet early when it would be less crowded. We were there at 6:30 a.m., the dining room mostly empty except for a few elderly early risers. Noah was eating cereal when I noticed him, the acne-scarred man from the pool deck, now wearing a server's uniform, standing by the juice station but not actually working. He was watching us. When our eyes met, he didn't look away. Instead, he smiled and started walking toward our table. I stood up so fast I knocked over my coffee cup. "Noah, we're leaving. Now." But when I turned, another man was behind us, younger, muscular, wearing a maintenance uniform. "Your son dropped this," he said, holding out a toy that wasn't Noah's. It was a distraction technique. I knew it instantly. The scarred man was now only 3 tables away. I grabbed Noah's hand and basically dragged him toward the nearest exit, but a third man appeared in the doorway. The fake Kevin from the kids' club. They were coordinating, boxing us in. That's when I did something I'm not proud of. I screamed. Not a help me scream, but a completely unhinged, "My child is having a seizure," scream that made everyone in the dining room turn. Noah looked at me in shock, but I pushed him to the floor and held his head, shouting for people to call medical. The elderly passengers rushed over, creating a crowd, and in the chaos, the 3 men melted away. They couldn't grab us with 20 witnesses surrounding us. Ship medical arrived with a wheelchair, and I kept up the act, saying Noah had childhood epilepsy, that I was a nurse, that we needed to get to the medical center immediately. Once we were in the medical bay with actual security present, I broke down and told them everything. The doctor, an older British woman named Dr. Whitmore, listened to my story while checking Noah over. She exchanged looks with the security chief, then quietly said, "You're not the first parent to report this. We've had 3 families leave the cruise early at previous ports after similar incidents." She pulled up something on her computer, then turned the screen away from us. "I'm going to recommend immediate disembarkation for medical reasons. There's a flight from Cozumel to Miami this afternoon. Security will escort you to pack and get off the ship." Her eyes were deadly serious. "Don't stop anywhere. Don't talk to anyone. Just pack and go." 2 security officers walked us to our cabin. Real security. With radios and serious expressions, not like the dismissive ones from before. While I threw our belongings into suitcases, one of them stood inside our room while the other guarded the hallway. Noah kept asking what was happening, why we were leaving, and I had to lie. "Mommy's really sick, baby. We need to go home." My hands shook as I zipped up the bags, remembering all those children's names called over the speakers. How many had actually made it home? The security officers took us down a service elevator I didn't even know existed, through corridors that passengers never see. Bare metal walls, exposed pipes, the underbelly of the floating city. We emerged at a crew exit on deck 2, where a van was already waiting. The younger security officer, a Filipino man who'd been silent the whole time, suddenly grabbed my arm as we were about to get in the van. "Ma'am," he whispered, "delete any photos from the ship. Don't post about this online. These people, they have connections everywhere. Just go home and forget this cruise happened." His fear was so genuine it made my knees weak. During the ride to the airport, I held Noah so tight he complained he couldn't breathe. But I couldn't let go. I kept thinking about that fake Kevin, how he'd known exactly what my son wanted, how prepared they all were. We made it home to Ohio that night. The cruise line refunded our entire trip without me even asking, which told me everything I needed to know about how much they wanted this buried. For weeks after, I had nightmares about those announcements, about children's names echoing through speakers while their parents searched frantically. I called the FBI, filed a report, but the agent who took my statement seemed unsurprised, tired even. "International waters," he said, like that explained everything. "We're aware of the situation. Thank you for your report." That was it. No follow-up, no investigation that I ever heard about. Jennifer, the pediatrician from Dallas, texted me once to say they'd made it home safely too. Then her number was disconnected. I never found out what happened to the children whose names were called. Sometimes I Google them. Sophia Martinez missing. Christopher Johnson disappeared. But nothing ever comes up. It's like they never existed. Noah doesn't remember much about the cruise now, thank God. He just knows we came home early because Mom got sick. But I remember everything. The way those men moved through the ship like they belonged there. The casual efficiency of their hunting. The perfect cover of thousands of distracted tourists. Sometimes, when I'm at a crowded mall or amusement park and hear a child's name called over the loudspeaker, my whole body goes cold, and I find myself scanning the crowd, looking for men who are watching too closely, smiling too widely, wearing uniforms that don't quite fit. The Atlantic was rougher than usual that September, and most passengers had already retreated to their cabins by the time everything went sideways. I'd been on the ship for 3 days, one of those mid-sized vessels that runs the New York to Southampton route. Nothing glamorous but comfortable enough. My cabin was on the 7th floor, just a small room with a porthole that stayed fogged up from the temperature difference between the ocean air and the ship's heating system. After 8 years with Boston PD and another 2 running my own security consulting firm, I'd gotten pretty good at reading people, noticing patterns that didn't belong. My sister had practically forced this trip on me after my divorce papers came through, told me 7 days at sea would help me reset, stop obsessing over surveillance footage and threat assessments for corporate clients who paid too much for peace of mind. She wasn't wrong. The first couple days had been exactly the kind of mindless relaxation I needed. Mediocre food at the buffet, a comedy show that made me laugh exactly once, and long hours sitting on the deck watching the horizon bob up and down. Everything changed on night 3, right around 11:30 in the main lounge. I'd been sitting at the bar with a glass of bourbon, watching the bartender, a Romanian kid named Anton who couldn't have been older than 25, juggle drink orders from increasingly drunk passengers. That's when the shouting started near the casino entrance. 2 men, both in their 40s, expensive clothing but wearing it wrong, like they'd bought it specifically for this trip. The bigger one had shoulders that stretched his navy blazer to its limits, and when he shoved the smaller guy, it wasn't just anger. It was calculated, theatrical even. The smaller man crashed into a table where 4 women were playing cards, sending chips and drinks flying everywhere. Then I noticed something that made every instinct from my police days light up. 3 other men, scattered throughout the lounge, all stood up at exactly the same moment. They weren't rushing to help or gawking like everyone else. They were moving with purpose, converging on the scene like they'd rehearsed it. The next 60 seconds turned the lounge into complete chaos. While everyone was focused on the 2 men fighting, the 3 others who'd stood up pulled out knives. Not kitchen knives or pocket knives, but ceramic blades, the kind that don't set off metal detectors. One of them, a wiry guy with a shaved head and a scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw, went straight for the purses and jewelry the card-playing women had left on their table. Another moved behind the bar where Anton stood frozen, and the third positioned himself at the main exit. The big guy who'd started the fight suddenly had a knife too, pressing it against the smaller man's throat while rifling through his pockets. That's when I realized the smaller man wasn't random. He was wearing a Patek Philippe watch worth at least 40 grand. and his wedding ring had a diamond that caught the light like a disco ball. The attackers had marked him earlier, probably watched him winning big at the casino or flashing cash at dinner. Nobody was screaming yet. It happened too fast for anyone to process what they were seeing. I'd left my service weapon at home, obviously. You can't bring guns on cruise ships. But I still had my tactical pen clipped to my pocket, a habit from the job. Without thinking it through, which was probably stupid, I stood up and moved toward the guy threatening Anton. He had the bartender's tip jar in one hand and his blade in the other, sweeping it back and forth to keep Anton pressed against the wall of bottles. I grabbed a heavy glass ashtray from the bar, they still had them even though nobody could smoke inside, and brought it down hard on the attacker's wrist. The crack was audible even over the growing panic in the room. His knife clattered across the floor, and Anton, bless him, didn't hesitate. He grabbed a bottle of vodka and smashed it over the guy's head, dropping him instantly. But that's when I made a mistake. I bent down to grab the ceramic knife, and when I stood back up, the scarred one was already moving toward me, his blade held low and professional, like someone who'd done this before. The lounge had erupted into full panic now, passengers scrambling for exits, tables overturning, glass breaking everywhere. The scarred man lunged at me with a boxer's footwork, quick jabs with the blade that forced me backward toward the windows overlooking the dark ocean. I managed to parry twice with the knife I'd picked up, but this guy knew what he was doing. He feinted left, then slashed right, catching my forearm and opening a gash that immediately soaked my sleeve with blood. The pain was sharp and hot, but adrenaline kept me moving. Behind him, I could see the big guy dragging the rich passenger toward a service door, still pressing the blade to his throat while his partner stuffed jewelry and wallets into a canvas bag. They were working fast, methodical, like they'd done this exact thing before. I kicked a chair into the scarred man's path, buying myself 2 seconds to grab a champagne bottle from an abandoned table. When he came at me again, I swung it like a baseball bat, connecting with his shoulder and spinning him sideways into the piano. That's when ship security finally showed up. 2 officers in white uniforms who looked like they'd never dealt with anything worse than a drunk passenger falling in the pool. They had batons but no guns, and they hesitated at the entrance, trying to make sense of the scene. The attackers didn't hesitate at all. The one at the exit whistled, sharp and loud like calling a dog, and suddenly they were all moving, abandoning their victims and loot, heading for different exits with practiced efficiency. The scarred one rolled away from the piano, clutching his shoulder but still mobile, and disappeared through a door marked crew only. The big guy shoved his hostage to the floor and vanished through the service entrance he'd been heading toward. Within 15 seconds, they were all gone, leaving behind a lounge that looked like a hurricane had hit it. Blood on the carpet, broken glass everywhere, passengers huddled behind overturned furniture, and me standing there with a slashed arm and a bloody champagne bottle, trying to explain to security that this wasn't just a bar fight gone wrong. The ship's medical center was on deck 3, and the doctor, a Hungarian woman named Dr. Kovacs with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, stitched my arm while I tried to convince the head of security that we had a serious problem. Captain Morrison, finally someone who seemed competent, showed up 20 minutes later, still buttoning his uniform jacket. I laid it out for him. The ceramic weapons, the coordinated movements, the crew-only door escape routes, the fact that they'd targeted specific wealthy passengers. These weren't opportunistic thieves or drunk troublemakers. They'd studied the ship's layout, identified marks, and planned their exits. The captain's face went pale when I mentioned the ceramic knives. "Those don't show up on our scanners," he said quietly, more to himself than to me. Dr. Kovacs paused mid-stitch when I described how they'd moved through the lounge, each man knowing exactly where to go. "How many passengers boarded in New York?" I asked. Morrison pulled out a tablet, scrolled through some files. 837, he said. "But we don't photograph passengers, only check passports against the manifest." I convinced Morrison to pull the security footage from embarkation day, and we spent the next 3 hours in a cramped office behind the bridge, watching grainy video on monitors that looked like they hadn't been upgraded since the 90s. Anton, who'd insisted on helping after his shift ended, turned out to have a photographer's eye for faces. He spotted them first, 5 men who'd boarded separately but all within the same 30-minute window, each carrying similar black duffel bags, each walking with that same controlled gait I'd noticed in the lounge. They'd spread out immediately after boarding, no acknowledgement of each other, but the timing was too perfect to be coincidence. We tracked them through the ship's cameras over the next 2 days. They ate at different restaurants, used different pools, never appeared together in public. But Anton noticed something I'd missed. They all had cabins on deck 2, the cheapest interior rooms, all in the same corridor. Who books 5 separate interior cabins on a transatlantic crossing? Anton asked, and that's when it clicked. I asked Morrison to check the booking records. All 5 reservations had been made on the same day, 6 weeks ago, all paid with prepaid credit cards, all using different travel agencies, but with sequential booking reference numbers. Morrison wanted to search their cabins immediately, but I stopped him. "They know we're onto them now," I said. "If we spook them, they might do something desperate. We're in the middle of the Atlantic, nowhere to run, but that also means nowhere for passengers to escape to either. Instead, I suggested we monitor them, figure out their next move." The captain agreed, assigning his 2 best security officers to shadow the corridors near their cabins. But these guys were smart. For the next 18 hours, none of them left their rooms. No room service orders, no bathroom breaks that we could detect, nothing. It was like they'd vanished inside those cabins. Then Anton, who'd been checking the dining records on his own initiative, found something interesting. Over the past 2 days, someone had been ordering massive amounts of food from the midnight buffet, enough for 15 people, and charging it to a cabin belonging to an elderly couple from Vermont, the Andersons, who'd been eating in the main dining room every night. When we checked the security footage from the buffet, we saw one of our suspects, the big guy from the fight, loading up multiple plates at 2 in the morning, then disappearing toward the service elevator. The pieces started coming together when Morrison pulled up the ship's blueprints. The service elevator from the buffet area connected to a maintenance corridor that ran along deck 2, right behind the row of cabins where our 5 suspects were staying. But here's what made my spine tingle. That same corridor led directly to the ship's storage hold, where passenger valuables were kept in safety deposit boxes. The cruise line marketed it as a secure service for travelers carrying expensive jewelry or large amounts of cash. Morrison's face went white when he realized what I was suggesting. "There's probably $3 million worth of items in that hold," he whispered. The attack in the lounge hadn't been the real crime. It was a distraction, a test run to see how security would respond, how long it would take, what kind of resistance they'd meet. They were planning something much bigger, and we were already on day 4 of a 7-day crossing. The next port was Southampton, but we had a brief stop in the Azores in 36 hours to refuel. If they were planning to rob the storage hold, they'd do it right before the Azores, then disappear into the Portuguese islands before anyone realized what had happened. We had less than 36 hours to stop them, and Morrison was already talking about alerting the Coast Guard, requesting a military escort, all the official procedures that would take too long and probably alert our suspects that we were onto them. I proposed something different. "Let them think they're invisible," I said, but we set a trap. The plan was risky but simple. We'd move all the real valuables out of the storage hold that night, replace them with fake jewelry and empty boxes, then wait for them to make their move. Morrison hesitated. The liability issues alone could end his career. But he knew we didn't have many options. That night, while most passengers were at the captain's formal dinner, Morrison, Anton, 2 trusted security officers, and I quietly emptied the storage hold. We packed everything into the captain's personal safe and 3 secured crew lockers, photographing each item for insurance purposes. Anton had a cousin who worked in the ship's theater, and we borrowed costume jewelry, spray-painted rocks to look like gold bars, even filled some boxes with poker chips from the casino. By 4 in the morning, the storage hold looked exactly the same, but contained nothing worth more than a few $100s. The waiting was the worst part. 28 hours passed with no movement from their cabins. I started to doubt myself, wondering if maybe I'd misread the whole situation. Then, at exactly 3:15 a.m. on our last night before the Azores, the ship's fire alarm went off in the kitchen, a grease fire that required all available crew to respond. Except I'd been watching the kitchen cameras, and there was no fire. Someone had triggered the alarm manually. Morrison and I stayed hidden in a maintenance closet near the storage hold, while chaos erupted above us. Through the door's vent, we heard footsteps, multiple sets, moving fast, but quiet. They had a key card that shouldn't have existed, opening the hold like they owned the place. We waited until all 5 were inside. Then Morrison hit the emergency lockdown he'd rigged earlier. The magnetic locks engaged with a solid thunk, trapping them inside with their worthless haul. When security opened the door 20 minutes later, the 5 men were standing among scattered costume jewelry and spray-painted rocks, their canvas bags half filled with fake gold bars. The scarred one actually laughed when he realized what had happened, shaking his head like he appreciated the play. Portuguese police were waiting when we docked in the Azores 6 hours later, and the FBI met us in Southampton with a warrant for the whole crew. Turns out these guys were part of a Romanian crime ring that had hit 3 other cruise lines in the past 2 years. Always with the same method: board with fake identities, create a distraction, then clean out the ship's valuables before vanishing at port. The FBI agent told me they'd stolen over $12 million total, always picking transatlantic routes where security was lighter and passengers carried more cash and jewelry. The ceramic knives were custom-made in Prague, designed specifically to beat ship security. What really got me was finding out about the inside help. A crew member in reservations had been feeding them information about wealthy passengers and cabin assignments for a cut of the profits. They caught him trying to board a flight to Bucharest the day after we docked. Morrison offered me a job as the cruise line's new head of security, but I turned it down. The ocean's beautiful and all, but I'll stick to land where criminals can't trap you in a metal box for 7 days. Anton ended up testifying at the trial and used the reward money to open his own bar in Boston. He named it the Ceramic Knife, which I told him was terrible marketing, but he didn't care. Sometimes I stop by for a drink and we talk about that night, how close those guys came to pulling off the perfect heist. My arm healed up fine, just left a thin white scar that aches when it rains. Every time I see a cruise ship advertisement now, I wonder how many people realize they're basically volunteering to be locked in a floating city with complete strangers, hoping everyone's exactly who they claim to be. The afternoon sun was beating down on the pool deck when everything changed. I was 38 then, managing a hardware store in Phoenix, and we'd saved for 2 years to take this cruise. Me, my wife Lisa, our teenage daughter Madison, and my dad Walter. He'd just turned 65 and retired from his job at the post office after 40 years. The man never took vacations, always said he'd travel when he retired, so we surprised him with this trip for his birthday. We were somewhere between Florida and Jamaica, second day at sea on a 7-day cruise that was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime. Dad was actually enjoying himself for once, laughing at Madison's attempts to teach him how to play shuffleboard, his face red from the sun despite the SPF 50 Lisa kept slathering on him. I remember the exact moment because Madison had just scored her first point and was doing this ridiculous victory dance when Dad's shuffleboard stick clattered onto the deck. His right hand was clutching his chest, fingers digging into his Hawaiian shirt, the ridiculous one with the parrots that Madison had bought him specifically for this trip. His face went from sunburn red to this awful grayish color in seconds. He tried to say something, but all that came out was this strangled gasp before his knees buckled. I caught him before he hit the deck, and his weight nearly took me down with him. His eyes were wide, terrified, and he kept grabbing at his chest like he was trying to tear something out. Lisa started screaming for help, while Madison stood there frozen, still holding her shuffleboard stick like she didn't understand what was happening. A crew member in a white uniform appeared within maybe 30 seconds, felt like hours, and immediately called for medical on his radio. They brought a wheelchair, But Dad couldn't even sit up properly. He kept slumping forward, his breathing coming in these horrible wheezes. We ended up carrying him, me under his arms, the crew member taking his legs, while Lisa ran ahead, clearing the path through the crowds of sunbathers who were all staring now. The medical center was down on deck 2, tucked behind the photo gallery where they try to sell you overpriced pictures of yourself boarding the ship. The smell hit me first, not the antiseptic hospital smell you'd expect, but this weird mixture of mildew and air freshener, like they were trying to cover up something. The waiting area had 3 plastic chairs and a water cooler that was empty, just the blue bottle sitting there collecting dust. The doctor, though I'm still not sure he was actually a doctor, introduced himself as Dr. Petrov, speaking with a thick Eastern European accent. He was maybe 28, 30 at most, with acne scars on his cheeks and medical scrubs that looked like they'd been washed too many times, all faded and thin. The nurse with him, a woman named Carla from the Philippines, at least seemed to know what she was doing. She got Dad onto the examination table, which was really just a padded bench bolted to the wall, and started checking his vitals. Dr. Petrov listened to Dad's chest with a stethoscope that looked older than me, then turned to us with this expression that made my stomach clench. "Is probable cardiac event," he said, like he was telling us Dad had a cold. "We give aspirin, monitor. Next port is 10, maybe 12 hours. He's stable enough." But Dad didn't look stable. His lips had this bluish tinge, and he kept clutching at his chest, tears streaming down his face from the pain. Lisa lost it then, and I'd never seen my wife like that in 16 years of marriage. She grabbed Dr. Petrov by his faded scrubs, actually grabbed him, and started shouting about helicopters, about calling the Coast Guard, about doing something real instead of just watching her father-in-law die. The doctor just stood there, blinking rapidly, while Carla gently pried Lisa's hands away. "Ma'am, please understand," Carla said quietly, her voice steady but her eyes showing she knew exactly how bad this was. "The helicopter evacuation costs minimum $50,000. Insurance usually no cover, and we need approval from corporate office first. Can take 4 or 5 hours just for paperwork." She showed us the medical supply cabinet then, probably trying to reassure us they had equipment, but it was pathetic. Some bandages, basic medications in bottles with labels so faded you could barely read them, an oxygen tank that looked like it belonged in a museum, and an EKG machine with a cracked screen held together with medical tape. Dad started vomiting then, this violent heaving that had him crying out in pain with each spasm. Dr. Petrov seemed genuinely surprised, like this wasn't in whatever manual he'd memorized. He fumbled with the oxygen tank, trying to get the mask on Dad's face, but the elastic strap snapped the moment he stretched it. He had to hold it manually while Carla searched for tape. I asked about nitroglycerin, about clot-busting drugs, about anything I'd heard of from medical shows, and Petrov just shook his head. "We don't stock such things. Too expensive, expire too fast, corporate policy." That's when I noticed the defibrillator in the corner, covered in dust with a note taped to it that said, "Out of order, awaiting parts." Madison was sobbing in the corner, calling her grandfather's name, while Dad's breathing got more labored, each breath sounding like he was drowning in his own lungs. The next 3 hours were the longest of my life. We took turns holding that oxygen mask to Dad's face because they only had 1 roll of medical tape, and it wasn't strong enough to hold the weight. Carla kept checking his pulse manually because the heart monitor's battery was dead, and the replacement was on order from corporate. Dr. Petrov disappeared for an hour, and when he came back, he smelled like cigarettes and wouldn't meet our eyes. Around hour 2, Dad started having what Carla quietly called episodes. His whole body would go rigid, eyes rolling back, lasting maybe 20 or 30 seconds each time. After the third one, even Petrov looked scared. He finally admitted he'd only been working cruise ships for 3 months, that he'd been a general practitioner in Romania for just 2 years before this, mostly dealing with colds and stomach bugs. The cruise line had hired him because he'd work for a third of what American doctors wanted. I'll never forget the conversation with the cruise director who showed up around hour 4. Gregory something or other, this spray-tanned guy in his 40s with veneers so white they hurt to look at, wearing a uniform with more fake gold than a costume shop. He walked in while Dad was mid-episode, waited for it to pass like it was just an inconvenience, then launched into this rehearsed speech about liability and international maritime law. "Your father signed a waiver when he boarded," he said, pulling out his phone to show me the terms and conditions nobody ever reads. Section 47B clearly states that medical facilities are limited and guests travel at their own risk. When Lisa started crying harder, he offered us a 20% discount on our next cruise and free drink packages for the rest of this trip. I wanted to throw him through the porthole, but I couldn't leave Dad's side. His skin had gone from gray to almost translucent, and I could see the veins in his temples pulsing irregularly, sometimes racing, sometimes barely moving at all. By hour 6, other passengers had started gathering outside the medical center. Word had gotten around the ship, and people were recording with their phones through the small window in the door. Some woman from Kansas City actually knocked and asked if we could keep it down because they were trying to enjoy the comedy show next door. That's when I snapped. I stormed out into the hallway and told everyone exactly what was happening, how the defibrillator was broken, how they wouldn't call for evacuation, how the doctor admitted he wasn't qualified, everything. People started posting it on social media immediately. Within an hour, Gregory was back, this time with the captain, a Norwegian man named Eriksson who at least had the decency to look uncomfortable. They offered to call for evacuation now, but only if we signed papers absolving the cruise line of all responsibility, and agreed to pay all costs up front. They had a credit card machine right there, ready to charge us the $50,000 deposit. Madison was the one who thought of calling the news. While Lisa and I argued with the captain about the evacuation, she used the ship's Wi-Fi, $15 for 30 minutes, because even in an emergency they were nickel and diming us, to email every news station she could find. She sent them videos of the broken equipment, recordings of Gregory's speech about liability, pictures of the out-of-order defibrillator. CNN actually called back within 20 minutes, and suddenly Captain Eriksson's phone started ringing non-stop. The cruise line's corporate office was in full panic mode. They approved the helicopter evacuation, but by then we'd been in that moldy medical center for 7.5 hours. Dad had stopped having episodes, which Carla said wasn't necessarily good news. He was barely responsive, his pulse so weak she had to check it at his neck because she couldn't find it at his wrist anymore. The helicopter arrived at hour 9, and getting Dad up to the landing pad was a nightmare I still dream about. The ship's elevator to the upper deck was undergoing maintenance, so 6 crew members had to carry him up 4 flights of stairs on a stretcher that was held together with duct tape on one corner. One of the handles actually broke midway, and this kid who couldn't have been older than 19 had to bear Dad's weight on his shoulder. The wind on the top deck was brutal, the helicopter hovering but unable to land because the cruise ship's landing pad hadn't been certified in 3 years, another cost-cutting measure. They had to lower a rescue basket, and watching them load my unconscious father into it, his body limp as a rag doll while the basket swayed in the wind 30 feet above the deck, was the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Lisa couldn't watch, and Madison filmed everything, later telling me she did it because she wanted evidence if something went wrong. Dad survived, barely. The doctors at the hospital in Fort Lauderdale said another hour, and he would have been gone. He'd had a massive heart attack, and the lack of proper treatment for those 9 hours had caused additional damage. His heart function was down to 30%. He spent 3 weeks in the ICU, had to have triple bypass surgery, and now, 2 years later, he still can't walk up a flight of stairs without stopping to rest. The medical bills hit $400,000, and the cruise line fought us on every penny, claiming we'd refused their initial treatment plan and created the delay ourselves by involving the media. We're still in litigation, but at least Dad is alive. The cruise line never admitted fault, just quietly settled the CNN story with a statement about reviewing their medical preparedness protocols. Dr. Petrov still works for them, just on a different ship. I know because Madison found him on social media, posting pictures from the crew deck, smiling like nothing ever happened. They did fix the defibrillator, though. That made it into their press release about their commitment to passenger safety. "22 years old, and I'd never been on anything bigger than my uncle's fishing boat back in Colorado. But there I was, standing on deck 7 of this massive ship, watching the Mexican coastline fade into darkness, while 4,000 other passengers partied around me. I'd saved for 2 years waiting tables at a greasy diner in Denver, pulling double shifts every weekend, telling myself it would all be worth it once I finally got on that ship. My roommate Ashley thought I was crazy to go alone, kept saying I should wait until we could go together after she saved up. But I needed this trip. I needed to prove to myself that I could do something big without anyone holding my hand. The first 2 days had been incredible, snorkeling at our port stop, meeting other solo travelers at the poolside mixers, eating more shrimp at the buffet than any human probably should. That third night, I decided to splurge on the steakhouse, the one where you had to make reservations and pay an extra $70 just to walk through the door. The dining room had these floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the ocean, candle-lit tables with actual cloth napkins, and servers who remembered your name after hearing it once. My waiter, this guy named Dominic with a thick Italian accent, recommended the ribeye with herb butter, said it was the best cut they'd gotten in weeks. When that plate arrived, I'm not gonna lie, I took like 5 photos before even picking up my fork. The steak was thick as a dictionary, charred black on the edges but bleeding pink inside, swimming in this green butter that had chunks of garlic and rosemary. First bite tasted a little metallic, kind of sharp on my tongue, but Dominic assured me that was just the dry aging process, something about enzymes breaking down the proteins. The couple next to me, the Brennans from Wisconsin, were celebrating their 40th anniversary, and Mr. Brennan kept joking that his steak was so good he might leave his wife for the chef. We laughed, shared travel stories, and I cleaned my entire plate, even sopping up the leftover butter with the complimentary bread. Around midnight, I woke up to my stomach doing these weird flips, like when you miss a step going downstairs and your whole body lurches. The room was pitch black except for this thin strip of moonlight coming through the balcony door, and the ship was rocking more than usual, making everything worse. I tried to ignore it, told myself I'd just eaten too much too fast, maybe mixed too many foods at once. But then came this sharp, twisting pain right below my ribs, like someone was wringing out my intestines like a wet towel. I barely made it to the tiny bathroom before everything came up. The steak, the potatoes, the 3 mojitos I'd had at the pool bar earlier. All of it burning my throat on the way back up. The vomiting wouldn't stop. These violent waves that left me hugging the toilet, my whole body shaking and covered in cold sweat. Between episodes, I noticed something that made my chest tighten with panic. The vomit had this dark, almost coffee ground texture to it, and there were these red streaks that definitely weren't from anything I'd eaten. I tried calling guest services from the phone next to the bed, but the line just rang and rang. No answer. My roommate for the cruise, this girl named Bethany from Oregon who I'd been matched with through the solo traveler program, wasn't in her bed, probably still at the nightclub on deck 12. I grabbed my room key, shoved my feet into flip-flops, and stumbled out into the hallway. One hand pressed against my stomach, the other trailing along the wall for support. The corridors were empty, just these endless stretches of identical doors and that weird cruise ship carpet, with the swirling patterns that made my nausea worse. Every few steps, I had to stop and lean against the wall, breathing through my nose, trying not to throw up again. The infirmary was on deck 2, according to the map I'd studied on the first day, which meant taking the elevator down 5 floors. While waiting for it to arrive, I heard someone else retching behind a nearby door, then another door further down, these horrible gagging sounds echoing through the hallway. The elevator took forever, and when it finally opened, there were already 3 people inside, all of them looking as rough as I felt. This middle-aged man in a Disney cruise shirt was bent over, gripping the handrail, his face this greenish-gray color I'd never seen on human skin before. A woman, maybe in her 30s, was sitting on the floor in the corner, holding a plastic ice bucket that reeked of bile. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. A teenage boy was slumped against the back wall, his legs shaking so bad his knees kept knocking together. Nobody said anything. We just stood there in our misery as the elevator crawled down, stopping at every single floor to pick up more sick passengers. By deck 4, we were packed in like sardines, 12 or 13 of us, the air thick with the smell of sweat and vomit and fear. This elderly woman next to me kept whispering, "This isn't right, this isn't right," over and over, clutching a rosary in her trembling fingers. When the elevator doors opened on deck 2, I thought I was hallucinating. The hallway leading to the infirmary was packed with people, a line stretching all the way back to the crew quarters. There must have been 60, maybe 70 passengers, all in various states of distress. Some were sitting on the floor with their backs against the walls, heads between their knees. Others were standing but swaying, using the walls or their companions for support. I saw Mrs. Brennan from dinner, the sweet lady from Wisconsin, throwing up into a trash bag while her husband rubbed her back, his own face pale and sweaty. There were parents carrying limp children, a pregnant woman crying while her partner fanned her with a cruise brochure, and near the front of the line, a man had actually passed out, lying flat on that ugly carpet while his wife screamed for help. The smell hit me like a physical force, human waste, vomit, and underneath it all, this metallic scent that reminded me of the steak from dinner, making my stomach clench all over again. I took my place at the end of the line, sliding down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, my knees pulled up to my chest. The woman next to me, still wearing her evening dress from whatever fancy event she'd attended, told me she'd been waiting for 2 hours already. 2 hours. She said the infirmary only had 1 doctor and 2 nurses for the entire ship, and they were completely overwhelmed. People who'd made it inside were coming back out saying the doctor was just giving everyone the same medicine, some generic anti-nausea pills, and sending them back to their rooms. No IV fluids for dehydration, no real examination, just pills and a pat on the back. The woman's husband had gone to find water somewhere, she said, because the crew had stopped responding to room service calls, and the nearest working water fountain was 3 decks up. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, and when she tried to stand up to adjust her position, her legs gave out completely, sending her crashing back to the floor. After another hour of waiting, barely moving forward in line, I watched a crew member in a white uniform push through the crowd, heading for the infirmary doors. People were grabbing at him, begging for help, for water, for information, but he just kept his head down and pushed forward. When he reached the doors, I heard him speaking rapidly into his radio, in what sounded like Filipino, and I caught a few words in English: containment, corporate, and media blackout. The doors opened just long enough for him to slip inside, and in that brief moment, I glimpsed the chaos within, gurneys lining the walls with people hooked up to IVs, a nurse running between patients, and the doctor, this exhausted-looking Indian man, arguing with someone in a suit who was definitely not medical staff. The suit was waving papers around, pointing at the sick passengers, shaking his head violently. Then the doors closed again, and we were left in the hallway with our suffering, the line not moving at all anymore. My dehydration was getting dangerous. I could feel it in the way my vision kept going dark at the edges, how my tongue felt like sandpaper against the roof of my mouth. The woman in the evening dress had stopped responding when people talked to her, just staring at the ceiling with glassy eyes. I knew I needed fluids desperately, but when I tried to stand up to go search for water, the hallway tilted sideways and I crashed into the wall, my legs like jelly. That's when this crew member, a young Filipino guy who couldn't have been older than 19, knelt down next to me. He looked around nervously, then pressed a half-empty water bottle into my hands, whispering in accented English that I needed to get back to my room immediately. He said the restaurant on deck 7, the fancy one where I'd eaten. Their freezer had broken 2 days ago, but management made them serve the meat anyway. Over 300 people had eaten there in the last 48 hours. He said corporate was flying in their own doctors tomorrow morning. But tonight, they were under strict orders to minimize treatment, to avoid creating a paper trail that could lead to lawsuits. Before I could ask him anything else, his supervisor appeared, barking at him in Tagalog, and he scrambled away. But his words kept spinning in my head as I sipped the precious water. Broken freezer, 300 sick people, minimizing treatment. I started noticing things I'd missed before in my misery. The crew members weren't drinking the ship's water. They all had sealed bottles from some external supplier. The security guards at the end of the hallway were wearing medical masks, something I'd never seen on a cruise before. And most telling of all, I spotted 2 passengers from first class, the ones who'd been at the captain's table that first night, being escorted through a side door directly into the infirmary, bypassing the entire line. The woman next to me saw it too and started crying, not from pain but from rage, realizing that even here, even in this nightmare, money determined who got saved first. She tried to scream about it, to alert the others, but her voice came out as barely a whisper, her throat too damaged from hours of vomiting. Around 5 in the morning, after I'd been in that hallway for nearly 5 hours, something shifted. The man in the suit came out of the infirmary with 2 security officers, and they started moving through the crowd, checking room numbers on people's key cards. When they got to me, the suit looked at his tablet, frowned, and told the security guards to escort me back to my room. I tried to protest, told him I needed medical attention, that I could barely stand, but he just smiled this cold corporate smile and said the doctor had determined I was well enough to recover in my cabin. The security guards lifted me up by my arms, and I was too weak to fight them. As they half-carried, half-dragged me toward the elevator, I heard the suit telling others the same thing, clearing out the hallway by force. The pregnant woman was sobbing, begging for help, but they just kept moving people out. The man who'd been unconscious on the floor was being loaded onto a luggage cart, his wife stumbling along behind, and nobody was even pretending to provide medical care anymore. They dumped me in my room and told me to stay there until further notice. That room service would bring me electrolyte drinks and crackers within the hour. Of course, nothing came. Bethany, my roommate, was in her bed, curled up in a ball, her sheets soaked with sweat. She'd been sick too, had tried to get help around 3 in the morning but never even made it to the infirmary, collapsing in the elevator. Another passenger had dragged her back to our room and left her there. We spent the next 18 hours taking turns in the bathroom, sharing the last of our bottled water, listening to the chaos in the hallway as more and more people got sick. I found out later when we finally docked in Mexico that 43 passengers had to be hospitalized immediately, 7 ended up in intensive care, and 2 elderly passengers actually died during that nightmare night at sea. The cruise line offered us a 25% discount on a future cruise as compensation, made us sign papers saying we wouldn't talk to the media, wouldn't post on social media, wouldn't sue. Most people signed just to get off that floating petri dish. I didn't sign anything, which is why I can tell you this story now, why I'm naming the cruise line Royal Atlantic Ventures, ship designation Paradise Queen, sailing out of Galveston on March 15, 2022. I spent 22 years fighting fires in Chicago, but nothing in all that time prepared me for what happened last April aboard the Celestial Dream. My daughter Megan had convinced me to take that Mediterranean cruise about 6 months after I retired, kept saying I deserved it after all those years of service, that I needed to finally relax and see the world beyond smoke and sirens. She'd found this deal online, 10 days through the Mediterranean, and basically wouldn't take no for an answer. Even drove me to the airport herself to make sure I actually went. The ship was massive, one of those floating cities with 8 restaurants, 3 pools, and enough activities to keep 2,000 passengers busy for weeks. We'd been at sea for 4 days, had just left Barcelona that morning heading toward Nice, and I was actually starting to enjoy myself, learning to play shuffleboard with a group of retirees from Michigan who'd adopted me into their morning coffee club. The weather had been perfect the entire trip. That kind of Mediterranean sunshine you see in travel magazines. Calm seas that barely made you remember you were floating on thousands of feet of water. That afternoon started like any other. I'd just finished lunch at the buffet on Deck 7, grilled salmon with those fancy little potatoes they served every day, and was heading down to my cabin for a quick nap before the evening's entertainment. The first sign something was wrong came around 3:30 when I noticed the horizon through my porthole window had this strange dark purple color, like a fresh bruise spreading across the sky. Then came the announcement from the captain, very calm, very professional, telling us we might experience some rough seas and suggesting passengers secure any loose items in their cabins. I remember thinking it was odd how the crew members I passed in the hallway were moving with this urgent efficiency, not quite running, but definitely not strolling, their faces tight with something I recognized from my firefighting days, that controlled concern professionals get when they know something civilians don't yet understand. Within 20 minutes, the ship started this slow, unnatural rocking that made my coffee mug slide across the desk in my cabin. I went out to the balcony, and what I saw made every instinct from 2 decades of emergency response kick in. Waves that looked like moving buildings, white foam spraying up higher than our deck, and that purple sky had turned into something biblical, clouds so black and low you could almost touch them. Other passengers were still walking around, some taking photos, completely oblivious to what was coming. But I started gathering my important stuff, passport, wallet, medications, and put them in a waterproof bag I always travel with, old habits from the job. I tried calling Megan, but the satellite connection was already getting spotty. Managed to send her a quick text saying we hit rough weather, but everything was fine. Didn't want to worry her. By 4 o'clock, they'd closed all the outdoor decks and the captain came back on. This time his voice had lost that casual tone, telling everyone to return to their cabins immediately and wait for further instructions. I couldn't stay in my cabin though, not with what I was seeing through that porthole. Waves that would disappear the entire view, then drop away to show nothing but angry gray water in every direction. I made my way up to Deck 5 where the main dining hall was, figuring if things went bad, I wanted to be somewhere with multiple exits, not trapped in a metal box 7 floors down. The dining hall was this massive space with floor-to-ceiling windows, crystal chandeliers. Must have had seating for 500 people easy, and right now it had maybe 30 confused passengers sitting at tables, trying to eat dinner while plates slid around despite the staff's attempts to steady them. That's when the first big wave hit. Not just rough seas anymore, but something that made the entire ship lurch sideways so hard that a grand piano on the stage broke free from its restraints and slid across the floor like it weighed nothing, crashing into the wall with a sound I'll never forget. Everything changed in seconds. Tables flipped, glass shattered everywhere, and people went tumbling across the floor mixed with food, broken dishes, and furniture that had become deadly projectiles. An elderly woman near me got thrown from her chair and slid 15 feet before hitting a pillar, her husband crawling after her while the ship tilted at an angle that shouldn't have been possible. The emergency alarm started blaring, this piercing electronic shriek that mixed with human screams and the sound of everything that wasn't bolted down, crashing from one side of the room to the other. I managed to grab onto a support column, helped pull a young couple behind it just as another wave hit from the opposite side. And this time I heard something structural give way, a deep groaning of metal that you feel in your bones more than hear. The lights flickered and went to emergency power, casting everything in this sick yellow glow, and through the windows all you could see was water, not sky and horizon like normal, just solid walls of black water rushing past like we were underwater. A crew member, this Filipino kid who couldn't have been older than 25, came stumbling through the chaos with blood running down his forehead, screaming for everyone to put on life jackets, pointing toward an emergency station near the entrance. Half the passengers couldn't even stand up with the ship rolling like it was, and I watched in horror as another massive wave visible through the window seemed to pause at the glass for a moment before smashing through, sending freezing seawater flooding across the dining hall floor. People were sliding in the water now, tables floating, and I heard someone yelling that water was coming up from the lower decks through the stairwells. The ship would tilt so far to one side that you were basically standing on the wall, then slam back the other way, and each time it happened, you could hear things breaking deep in the ship's belly. Expensive things, important things, maybe vital things. I managed to reach the life jacket station, started throwing the orange vests to anyone I could reach while trying to keep my footing on the floor that had become a river of seawater mixed with broken glass and debris. There was this family from somewhere in the Midwest, parents with 2 teenage kids, all 4 of them huddled together behind an overturned table, the father's arm bent at an unnatural angle, the mother holding a cloth napkin against a gash on her daughter's leg. I helped them into their life jackets, showed them how to pull the straps tight, and that's when the captain's voice came over the speakers again, except this time he was shouting the words nobody wants to hear on a ship. This is not a drill. All passengers and crew to muster stations immediately. Repeat, this is not a drill. The way he said it, you could hear the fear underneath the training, and that scared me more than the waves or the tilting or even the water rushing in. We tried to move as a group toward the muster station, but another wave hit, and suddenly the lights went out completely for about 10 seconds that felt like hours. Just total darkness, with invisible water sloshing around your legs, and people screaming from every direction. When the emergency lights kicked back on, I saw that the water in the dining hall was now waist-deep and rising fast, and through what was left of the windows, these waves that had to be 40, maybe 50 feet high, just mountains of water with white peaks that would lift the entire ship up like a toy before dropping it into the next valley. An older man next to me was having a panic attack, couldn't breathe, kept saying his wife was still in their cabin on deck 3, and I had to physically hold him back from trying to go down there because we could all hear it now. The sound of water rushing through the lower parts of the ship, doors banging open and closed, the deep creaking of a massive structure being pushed beyond what it was designed to handle. Getting to the muster station became like something out of a nightmare, where you're trying to run but can't move fast enough. We were basically climbing along the walls when the ship tilted, then sliding back down when it righted itself, all while fighting through water that was getting deeper by the minute. I saw a woman get swept away from her husband's grip, carried by the water toward the shattered windows, and 3 of us formed a human chain to pull her back, her face white with terror, coughing up seawater. The crew members who were supposed to be managing the evacuation looked just as terrified as the passengers. These young people who'd probably only ever done this in calm water drills, now faced with a ship that felt minutes away from rolling over completely. One of them, a girl with a thick Eastern European accent, was crying while she tried to do a head count. Her clipboard dissolved into wet pulp, mascara running down her cheeks as she kept repeating the evacuation protocols like a prayer. By the time we reached the muster station on deck 4, the situation had gone from dangerous to apocalyptic. The lifeboat area was chaos, with crew members trying to lower boats while the ship pitched so violently that the boats would swing out over the water, then come crashing back into the side of the ship. I watched one lifeboat get crushed like an aluminum can against the hull, just destroyed in seconds, and realized with this cold certainty that we might not have enough functional boats left, even if we could launch them. People were fighting to get closer to the remaining boats, families getting separated, and I saw a man push an elderly woman down to get ahead, the veneer of civilization disappearing as fast as our chances of survival. The wind was howling so loud you had to scream to be heard, rain coming sideways like bullets, and every few seconds another wave would sweep across the deck, taking anyone who wasn't holding on to something and washing them toward the railings or worse. That's when I heard it, the sound that made even the crew members stop what they were doing. This tremendous metallic shriek from somewhere below, followed by a shudder that ran through the entire ship like it had been punched by God himself. The floor beneath us suddenly tilted past 45 degrees and stayed there, people sliding down the deck in a tangle of bodies and life jackets, some going straight over the rail into the black churning ocean below. I managed to wrap my arms around a support pole, holding on while my feet dangled in the air, watching in absolute terror as the horizon through the rain seemed to be rotating, the ship beginning what felt like a slow-motion roll that would flip us completely. Water was pouring in from everywhere now, not just waves but from inside the ship itself, geysers shooting up through drain grates, cascading downstairs, and I could hear the engines making sounds they should never make, like dying animals trapped in the engine room. For 30 seconds, that lasted a lifetime. We hung there on the edge of capsizing, 2,000 people holding their breath, prayers in a dozen languages mixing with the storm's roar, waiting to see if we'd complete that roll into the Mediterranean. Then, impossibly, the ship started to right itself, fighting back against the storm with whatever was left of its stabilizers and the captain's desperate maneuvering, the deck slowly becoming horizontal again, though nothing felt stable or safe. A crew member with a radio was yelling that the Greek Coast Guard was 8 miles out, helicopters already in the air, and rescue ships pushing through the storm toward our position, but 8 miles in seas like this might as well have been 800. We spent the next 3 hours in pure survival mode, helping injured passengers, forming human barriers to keep people from getting washed overboard, bailing water with anything we could find while the ship limped along, lower in the water with each passing hour but somehow still floating. When the first helicopter appeared through the rain, its searchlight cutting through the darkness like salvation itself, people started crying, collapsing with relief, though we all knew it would take dozens of trips to evacuate everyone, and the ship was still taking on water faster than the pumps could handle. They evacuated the injured and elderly first, winching them up into helicopters that danced in the wind like leaves, and I stayed until almost the end, helping load people into rescue baskets, keeping panicked passengers calm while water lapped at our feet on what used to be the upper deck. It took 14 hours to get everyone off the Celestial Dream, and I was in one of the last groups to leave, watching from the rescue ship as our cruise liner, lit up by emergency floodlights from the Greek vessels, finally gave up its fight and slipped beneath the surface just after dawn. Nobody died that night, which the news kept calling a miracle, though 43 people ended up hospitalized and hundreds more with injuries that didn't make the statistics. They flew us to Athens, put us up in hotels, and cruise line representatives with practiced sympathy and liability waivers came around offering compensation and free future cruises that nobody in that room would ever take. I got home to Chicago 2 days later, Megan meeting me at O'Hare with tears streaming down her face, holding me like I might disappear if she let go. She'd seen the news coverage, those helicopter videos of the ship tilting at impossible angles, passengers clinging to railings while waves swept the decks, and she kept apologizing for pushing me to take the trip, which broke my heart because none of it was her fault. The official investigation blamed it on a rare meteorological phenomenon, a sudden pressure drop that created hurricane-force conditions in minutes, something that happens maybe once a decade in the Mediterranean. But knowing the science behind it doesn't stop the nightmares where I'm back on that tilting deck, watching people slide toward the rails, hearing that metal shriek that meant we were seconds from becoming another maritime disaster documentary. I still can't watch cruise ship commercials, and when friends talk about their vacation plans, I just nod and change the subject. Because how do you explain that 22 years of running into burning buildings didn't scare you half as much as one afternoon when nature decided to remind 2,000 tourists that the ocean doesn't care about your shuffleboard schedule or dinner reservations? "5 months ago, I was just another burned-out ICU nurse desperately needing a break from 12-hour shifts and the constant beeping of monitors. After watching 3 patients code in a single week at the hospital in Houston where I worked, I finally cashed in 2 years' worth of savings and booked myself on a 7-day cruise through the Eastern Caribbean. The Ocean Jewel was one of those massive ships you see in commercials, 16 decks of pure escapism with pools, restaurants, and enough activities to make you forget that the real world even existed. I remember standing at the port in Port Canaveral, staring up at this floating city and thinking that for once in my life, I was going to completely disconnect and just let myself breathe. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. Morning yoga on the upper deck, afternoon margaritas by the pool, and dinner at restaurants where I didn't have to eat standing up between patient rounds. Everything changed on the third night, somewhere between the Bahamas and our next port. I'd gone to bed early after too much wine at the captain's dinner, one of those fancy affairs where they parade the officers around and everyone pretends they're not already sunburned and exhausted. My cabin was on deck 7, nothing special but comfortable enough, with a tiny balcony where I could sit and watch the dark ocean roll by. Around 2:47 a.m., I know the exact time because I'd developed that nurse habit of always checking the clock when something wakes me. I heard what sounded like someone running full speed down the corridor outside my door. Then came the screaming, not just one voice but several, the kind of raw, terrified sounds that make your whole body go rigid. In the ICU, you learn to differentiate between types of screams, and these weren't drunk party guests having too much fun. These were people in genuine distress, and before I could even think about it, my feet were on the floor and I was pulling on the jeans I'd thrown over the chair. The corridor was chaos when I cracked open my door. 3 cabins down, a middle-aged couple stood in their doorway, the woman clutching a torn nightgown to her chest while her husband had blood running from a gash above his eyebrow. Their cabin door hung at an odd angle, the lock mechanism completely destroyed like someone had taken a crowbar to it. Further down, I could see at least 2 more cabin doors standing wide open, and there was this weird chemical smell in the air, sharp and medicinal, that reminded me of the chloroform we'd studied in nursing school but haven't used in decades. A younger woman, maybe early 20s, was sitting on the floor against the wall, her wrists marked with deep red lines where zip ties had clearly been, and she kept repeating the same thing over and over. They had master keys. They had master keys. The emergency lighting had kicked on, casting these harsh shadows that made everything look even more nightmarish than it already was. What really made my gut twist was seeing the crew members who responded. 2 security officers showed up after what felt like forever, but was probably only 4 or 5 minutes, and instead of immediately calling for backup or starting to document the scene, they began ushering people back into their cabins, almost aggressively insistent that everyone needed to return to their rooms for their own safety. One of them, a tall guy with a Baltic accent and a name tag that read Dimitri, kept telling us there had been a minor disturbance and that everything was under control. But I could see into the Hamiltons' cabin. I'd met them at the pool bar the day before, a retired couple from Arizona celebrating their 40th anniversary, and their entire room had been ransacked. The safe had been pried open, clothes were everywhere, and Mrs. Hamilton was sitting on the bed with her hands still bound behind her back with those white zip ties that left deep marks in her skin. The security officer actually tried to block my view when he saw me looking, physically stepping between me and their doorway while insisting I needed to go back to my cabin immediately. Against every instinct screaming at me to help, I let them push me back toward my room, but not before I caught sight of something that made everything click into place. Near the emergency exit at the end of the corridor, there was a maintenance cart, one of those gray rolling things the housekeeping staff use, except this one had what looked like electronic equipment piled on top, the kind of signal jammers I'd seen demonstrated at a hospital security conference about protecting patient data. The cart was partially covered with a standard cleaning tarp, but I could see the corner of what was definitely a commercial-grade lock-picking gun, the expensive type that can open most hotel-style card readers in seconds. When Dimitri noticed me staring, he actually grabbed my upper arm, not hard enough to bruise but firm enough to make his point, and walked me back to my cabin personally. His partner, a shorter woman whose badge I couldn't read in the dim light, was already on her radio speaking in rapid Portuguese, and I distinctly heard her say something about damage control in English before switching back. I spent the next hour sitting on my bed with the door locked and a chair wedged under the handle, listening to the sounds outside gradually die down. My phone had no signal, which wasn't unusual in the middle of the ocean, but the ship's Wi-Fi was mysteriously undergoing maintenance when I tried to connect. Around 4 a.m., an announcement came over the PA system from someone claiming to be the hotel director, explaining that there had been an unfortunate incident involving a disturbed passenger who had been apprehended and confined. And they assured everyone that the situation was completely under control and that counseling would be available in the morning for anyone affected. But here's what that announcement didn't explain: why I could hear at least 5 different cabins reporting thefts when I pressed my ear to the door, or why the couple from cabin 7043 was describing 3 attackers, not 1. It definitely didn't explain why I heard that same security officer, Dimitri, telling someone on his radio to make sure the service elevator cameras stay off until we're done cleaning up. The next morning, the main dining hall was eerily normal, like someone had hit a reset button on the entire ship. Waiters smiled and poured coffee. The breakfast buffet gleamed under warming lights, and that same cheerful cruise director who'd been leading poolside games was making announcements about the day's activities in St. Thomas. But at least a third of the tables were empty, and those of us who did show up kept exchanging these knowing looks, like survivors of something we weren't supposed to talk about. I found the Hamiltons sitting in a corner booth, Mrs. Hamilton wearing long sleeves despite the warming morning sun, probably to hide the marks on her wrists. When I approached them, Mr. Hamilton immediately tensed up, but his wife grabbed his hand and nodded for me to sit. She leaned in close and whispered that they'd lost everything: passports, cash, her grandmother's wedding ring, about $12,000 worth of jewelry they'd brought for their anniversary. The security team had taken their statement at 5 a.m., she said, making air quotes with her fingers, and told them they'd be compensated through insurance if they signed some papers and agreed not to discuss the incident with other passengers to prevent panic. That's when things got really interesting. A man at the next table, close enough to overhear, turned around and introduced himself as Paul, a cybersecurity consultant from Seattle. He pulled out his phone and showed me something he'd managed to capture before the ship's Wi-Fi went down. A crew member's Facebook post from 2 days earlier, written in Tagalog but which he'd translated, joking about easy targets and big score coming. The crew member worked in guest services, had access to the passenger manifest, and knew exactly which cabins had elderly couples traveling with valuables. Paul had also noticed something I'd missed. 3 crew members had suddenly fallen ill that morning and been confined to quarters, including one from the security team. He'd overheard the staff captain telling another officer that they needed to contain this before we dock, and that corporate would handle it internally. Paul had been trying to reach the FBI through a satellite phone he'd borrowed from another passenger, but mysteriously, all outside communications were being blocked, supposedly due to technical difficulties. By noon, our little group of aware passengers had grown to about 15 people, all comparing notes in hushed conversations around the ship. A woman named Janet from cabin 7039 revealed that she'd actually seen her cabin steward, a guy she'd been tipping generously all week, standing in her doorway at 2:30 a.m. with 2 other men she didn't recognize. When she screamed, they'd run, but not before she noticed one of them carrying what looked like a master keycard on a lanyard marked "Security Override." Another passenger, a retired cop from Philadelphia named Frank, had done some investigating of his own and discovered that the cameras on Deck 7 had been undergoing maintenance for exactly the window when the attacks occurred, from 2:30 to 4 a.m. He'd also noticed that several of the crew members who'd been most friendly and chatty during the first 2 days were suddenly nowhere to be found, and when he'd asked about one particular room steward, he was told the man had been transferred to another deck just that morning. The pattern was becoming undeniable. This wasn't some random crime of opportunity, but a coordinated operation that required inside knowledge, master keys, and the ability to manipulate the ship's security systems. The breaking point came when we reached St. Thomas that afternoon. As the ship prepared to dock, Paul and I watched from the upper deck as 3 crew members were quietly escorted off through a service gangway, not the main passenger exit. They were wearing civilian clothes and carrying duffel bags, trying to blend in with the dock workers, but I recognized one of them. It was the woman who'd been with Dimitri the night before, the one speaking Portuguese on the radio. When a group of us tried to disembark to file a police report with local authorities, we were told that due to administrative issues, passengers from Deck 7 were temporarily restricted from leaving the ship. The hotel director himself came down to explain that this was for our protection while they worked with proper channels to investigate. But Janet had managed to slip out through a crew exit and made it to the police station, only to be told that the cruise line had already contacted them about a minor theft that was being handled internally, and that maritime law meant they had no jurisdiction unless we could prove physical assault had occurred on U.S. territory. The officers seemed strangely uninterested in taking her statement, and she overheard one of them mention something about not wanting to disrupt tourism relations with the cruise company that brought millions of dollars to their port. That evening, as we sailed away from St. Thomas, Frank organized what he called a documentation party in his suite. About 20 of us gathered with whatever evidence we'd collected: photos of damaged doors, recordings of suspicious radio chatter that some passengers had captured on their phones, screenshots of crew social media posts, and written accounts of everything we'd witnessed. A woman named Dorothy, who worked as a paralegal back in Indiana, helped everyone write detailed statements with times, dates, and specific descriptions. We used Frank's military-grade satellite phone, which he'd hidden in a locked Pelican case, to upload everything to a cloud server and email copies to the FBI, Coast Guard, and several news outlets. The ship's administration must have figured out what we were doing, because suddenly there was a knock on the door, and the hotel director appeared with 4 security officers, including Dimitri, claiming they'd received a noise complaint, and that gatherings of more than 10 passengers in a single cabin were against safety regulations. They tried to confiscate our phones and cameras, saying they needed them as evidence for their internal investigation, but Frank stood his ground, reminding them that they had no legal authority to seize personal property without a warrant, and that any attempt to do so would be considered theft. Ironic considering the circumstances. For the remaining 3 days of the cruise, it was basically a standoff. They couldn't throw us off the ship without creating an even bigger incident, and we couldn't force them to properly investigate their own crime ring. But here's what ended up happening. When we finally docked back in Port Canaveral, there were 2 FBI agents and a Coast Guard investigator waiting at the gangway, thanks to Frank's connections and the evidence we'd transmitted. 17 passengers from Deck 7 filed official complaints, and the local news picked up the story after Paul leaked it to a tech journalist friend who had a huge Twitter following. The cruise line initially tried to spin it as an isolated incident involving a single rogue employee. But when the FBI found over $200,000 in stolen goods in a crew storage area and detected that the security system had been deliberately sabotaged using admin access codes, they had to open a full investigation. 3 months later, I got a call from a federal prosecutor telling me that 11 crew members had been arrested, including 2 security supervisors and a guest services manager who'd been running this racket on multiple cruise lines for years, specifically targeting elderly passengers with valuable anniversary or retirement gifts. The cruise line quietly settled with all the victims out of court, paying way more than what was stolen just to keep us from talking to more media outlets. Though obviously that ship has sailed, pun intended, since I'm sharing this story now. I was fresh out of high school when my closest friends and I decided to book a cruise as a graduation trip. There were 5 of us: Ethan, Claire, Jordan, Emily, and me, and we figured a week at sea would be the perfect way to mark the end of one chapter and the start of another. My life back then was simple: part-time job at a grocery store, college applications hanging over my head, and that restless energy of wanting something bigger. The cruise was supposed to be our escape, one last stretch of freedom before responsibility caught up with us. The ship itself felt like a floating city: bright casinos, all-night buffets, pools stacked on different decks. We spent the first couple of days bouncing from one activity to another, barely sleeping, drunk on the novelty of it all. But the vibe shifted late one night when Claire and I wandered past a staff corridor near the lower decks. We weren't supposed to be there, but the door to a service stairwell had been left propped open. That's where we heard two crew members talking in hushed voices. Their accents were different, but one phrase cut through clear. "The morgue compartments are already too full." At first, I thought I'd misheard. A morgue on a cruise ship wasn't something I'd ever considered. Claire grabbed my arm, eyes wide, and whispered, "Did you hear that?" We stood frozen in place, listening. One of the men sighed and said, "We'll have to mark the rest as medical incidents. No space left." They moved farther down the hallway before we could catch more. Claire wanted to bolt back upstairs immediately, but I convinced her to act normal. We told the others what we heard, and Ethan laughed it off, saying every ship had a morgue for emergencies. Jordan, though, looked unsettled and muttered, "Too full? That doesn't make sense." The strangeness turned into something darker a couple of nights later. Emily got into a heated argument with a bartender after she accused him of shortchanging her. She wasn't drunk, just stubborn and loud when she felt wronged. A supervisor stepped in, a tall man with slicked back hair and an expression that stayed unreadable no matter what Emily said. The fight fizzled out eventually, but not without her muttering she'd report him to guest services. That was the last time we saw her. The next morning, her bed was empty, her phone left charging by the nightstand, and none of her belongings looked disturbed. We reported Emily missing right away, but the response from the staff felt rehearsed. The supervisor she argued with claimed she'd been seen leaving a lounge with new friends around midnight, even though none of us remembered her saying anything about meeting anyone. The ship's security assured us they'd make announcements and check surveillance, but no announcement ever came. When we pressed again, they insisted she must have disembarked during a port stop, something that didn't add up, since all of her things were still in the cabin. It felt like we were being pacified instead of helped. That night, Ethan suggested we split up and quietly look around the restricted areas. He was half joking, but the longer we sat in that tiny cabin staring at Emily's untouched shoes by the door, the less like a joke it felt. Jordan managed to charm a cleaning lady into pointing out where the crew's access elevators went. Claire and I took one of them down, timing it between staff runs. The air grew colder the deeper we went, the carpet giving way to plain steel floors. When the doors opened, the smell hit us first. Industrial cleaner mixed with something metallic and sour, faint but undeniable. We didn't get far. A man in uniform rounded the corner, eyes narrowing the second he saw us. He asked what we were doing there, his voice calm but with an edge that made it clear we weren't welcome. Claire blurted something about being lost, and he walked us back up without another word. The silence on that elevator ride was suffocating. He didn't scold us, didn't threaten us, just stared straight ahead like we didn't exist. When we returned to the cabin, Ethan and Jordan were waiting, pale-faced. They claimed they'd overheard two crewmen talking by the loading bay about moving another one before morning. By the following day, rumors started circulating among passengers. Someone said a young woman had fallen overboard. Another insisted it was a medical evacuation. None of it matched what we knew. When we asked security again about Emily, they repeated the same vague line about her choosing to leave. Jordan lost his temper and shouted at them, only to be threatened with confinement for disrupting order. That's when it clicked for all of us. Emily wasn't coming back, and whatever was happening below deck was being carefully hidden behind official-sounding excuses. Ethan insisted we had to get proof, even if it meant risking being caught again. That night, we waited until the hallways were quiet and slipped back toward the service elevators. Jordan had swiped a room key left unattended on a cart, which surprisingly worked on the lower levels. We kept our phones ready, flashlights off, hearts pounding so hard I could feel mine in my ears. The air down there wasn't just cold, it felt heavy, the kind of atmosphere where every sound echoes too loudly. Behind one locked door, faint humming of machinery mixed with what sounded like refrigeration units. When we reached the end of a narrow corridor, we saw a metal door slightly ajar. Ethan nudged it open just enough for us to peek inside. Stainless steel drawers lined the walls, and in the dim light we caught the unmistakable sight of toe tags. There were more than I could count in those few seconds. Claire let out a gasp that she couldn't stifle, and the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the frame. A shadow moved in the reflection of the steel. Someone had been inside. Without saying a word, we bolted back to the elevator, praying the stolen key still worked. It did, but just barely. The next morning, security knocked on our cabin door. They claimed an incident report had been filed against us for trespassing in restricted areas. We played dumb, insisting we'd been in the casino all night, but the officer's eyes lingered on each of us long enough to make it clear we were being watched. The rest of the cruise blurred into paranoia. We stuck together constantly, avoided staff, and barely spoke above a whisper in case someone was listening. Emily's name never appeared in the daily bulletins. It was as if she'd been erased. When the ship finally docked, we packed up and walked off without looking back. No one contacted us, no investigation followed, and her disappearance was eventually dismissed as a runaway case. Even now, years later, the sound of those crew members whispering about compartments too full hasn't left me. I can still see Emily's phone, screen glowing with a half-written message she never sent. We told her parents everything, but without proof, it sounded like wild paranoia. And maybe that's what the ship counts on, that people like us go home, too scared and powerless to fight back. I booked that cruise because it was the cheapest way to see a bit of the world during my college break. The ship wasn't fancy by any means. Paint chipped in a few places, corridors narrow enough that two people had to shuffle sideways to pass each other. But I figured it didn't matter. My cabin was small, with a single bed pressed against the wall, a desk with a loose drawer that squeaked when I opened it, and a porthole that looked out onto nothing but endless gray water. It wasn't glamorous, but for someone traveling alone on a tight budget, it felt like enough. I spent the first day exploring, eating at the buffet, and reminding myself this was supposed to be relaxing. On the second night, I returned to my cabin after dinner and noticed a small folded piece of paper lying just inside the door. At first, I thought maybe housekeeping had left a note about towels or something trivial. But when I unfolded it, the words were handwritten in shaky block letters. "Don't trust the crew." That was it. No signature, no explanation, nothing else. I remember staring at it for several minutes, trying to decide whether this was some stupid prank, or if it was even meant for me. The handwriting looked rushed, like whoever wrote it was in a hurry. I didn't mention it to anyone at first. I slipped the note into my backpack and tried to brush it off, but the thought of it followed me around the ship. Every time a crew member smiled and asked how my day was, I wondered if they knew something I didn't. I tried to act normal, but I found myself scanning faces, watching body language, noticing details I would never usually notice. A man polishing glasses at the bar who never once looked up. A steward in the hallway who seemed to hover outside certain cabins for longer than necessary. It felt like I'd been pulled into some secret I wasn't supposed to know. By the next morning, another note appeared under my door. This one said, "They'll deny everything. Stay quiet." That rattled me more than I want to admit. I finally worked up the nerve to take both notes to the purser's desk, thinking someone would take it seriously. Instead, the woman behind the counter gave me a polite laugh, said passengers sometimes imagined things at sea, and told me not to worry. She slid the notes back toward me as if she didn't even want to hold them. Walking away, I felt embarrassed, like I'd been dismissed as paranoid, but a part of me couldn't shake the warning. After that encounter, I tried convincing myself it was just someone's idea of a joke, but things started to feel different around the ship. During breakfast, I noticed a guy I'd chatted with the day before, a student from another state traveling solo too, wasn't at his usual spot. I figured he overslept, but then at lunch he wasn't there either. By dinner, his chair remained empty, and no one mentioned him. No announcement, no casual. He disembarked early. He was just gone. The next day, it happened again with a woman I'd seen frequently reading by the pool. She always wore this wide-brimmed hat, easy to spot in a crowd. Suddenly, she wasn't there anymore. Her lounge chair stayed empty, her towel never picked up. I remember walking the deck in circles, half expecting to catch sight of her somewhere else, but she had vanished just as completely as the first guy. At that point, I started paying closer attention to who was traveling alone. A few of them simply stopped appearing. That night, I returned to my cabin and found a third note pushed under the door. My chest tightened the moment I picked it up. This one read, "You're not next, yet. Stay alert." That word, yet, sat in my head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. I barely slept, and every time I heard footsteps outside my door, I stared at the crack of light under it, waiting to see if another shadow paused there too long. The hum of the engines that once felt comforting now sounded like a warning, constant and heavy. I tried reporting it again, this time to a different officer at the reception desk, but he just brushed it off as seasickness messing with my head. "People get restless out here," he said, practically ushering me away. I walked off, clutching the notes, feeling both foolish and terrified. If the crew wouldn't believe me, who was I supposed to trust? The ship felt huge, but suddenly it was shrinking around me. Every hallway another place someone could be waiting. Every closed door a reminder of those passengers I never saw again. By the 5th day, I stopped trying to convince myself I was imagining things. The dining hall felt emptier, though no one else seemed to acknowledge it. Families laughed, couples posed for photos, and the crew kept smiling like nothing unusual was happening. I kept scanning for familiar solo travelers and coming up short. The absence was deafening. My own meals turned mechanical. I barely tasted the food, too focused on counting who was still around. Late that evening, I caught sight of 2 crew members guiding a young man I'd noticed traveling alone toward a stairwell at the far end of a corridor. He didn't look drunk, but his steps were unsteady, like he was reluctant to follow. When he glanced back, his face carried something I'll never forget, like he wanted to call out but knew it wouldn't matter. Before I could react, the crew ushered him around the corner and out of sight. That was the moment I knew the notes weren't just warnings, they were facts. I spent the rest of that night barricaded in my cabin, dragging the desk and even the chair against the door. Every creak in the hallway made me hold my breath. No new note appeared, but that almost made it worse. The silence pressed down harder than the scribbled threats ever had. I didn't sleep until the sun filtered faintly through the porthole, turning the ocean pale blue. The ship docked 2 days later, and I walked off with nothing but my backpack, barely stopping to breathe until I was on solid ground again. To this day, I don't know what happened to those missing passengers. No official report, no news stories, nothing I could find afterward. It's like they were erased. I still have the 3 notes tucked inside a notebook at home, the handwriting uneven and smudged where my fingers clutched them too tightly. Sometimes I wonder why whoever wrote them chose to warn me at all. Maybe I was just lucky. Or maybe I was one step away from being the next name nobody ever mentioned again. I signed up for that cruise because it was the cheapest option my friends and I could find. And honestly, it felt like the kind of spontaneous trip college kids are supposed to take. We weren't chasing luxury, just a chance to be out on the water, sharing a cramped cabin, splitting costs and pretending we were adults on vacation. I remember the ship looking older than I expected when we boarded. The paint dull, the metal railings already showing patches of rust, but we laughed it off. At that point, the only thing on my mind was how surreal it felt to be out at sea with my friends, away from assignments and campus noise. The first 2 days were uneventful, just sun, crowded buffets, and awkward conversations with strangers at shared tables. I spent most of that time with my roommate for the trip, Leah, who had this restless energy, always darting off to explore different decks, always dragging me along to see the view from up here, or what's happening down there. She kept saying it felt like something was brewing, pointing out how the sky never seemed fully clear, even when everyone else was sunbathing. I shrugged it off, assuming she was just overthinking. We were young and convinced nothing serious could touch us out there. Everything shifted on the 3rd night. Dinner had just ended when an announcement crackled over the speakers, cutting through the usual chatter. The captain's voice was steady but clipped, telling us that a storm had taken an unexpected turn. It wasn't supposed to be anywhere near our path, but now it was heading straight for us. People laughed nervously at first, but when the crew started handing out instructions with tight expressions, the tension spread fast. Leah gave me this sharp look like she'd been right all along, and for the first time, I felt the air in the ship thicken with dread. By midnight, the ship was no longer gliding, it was groaning. Each swell hit us like a giant hand shoving the entire vessel sideways. Hallways tilted, plates shattered somewhere below us, and every wall seemed to rattle in protest. The lights flickered on and off until eventually they cut out completely. Imagine hundreds of passengers stumbling in total darkness, the sound of water rushing where it shouldn't be, and the metal around you straining with every wave. I clutched the railing outside our cabin door so hard that my knuckles went numb, convinced the next crash would split the ship in half. Leah and I tried to make our way toward the stairwell, but the floor pitched so violently that we slid into the wall more than once. People were shouting in the dark, voices echoing off the narrow corridors, some calling for family members, others just screaming with each jolt. A crew member passed us with a flashlight, barking instructions that were lost under the crash of water slamming against the hull. For a moment, I could smell the seawater before I felt it. Cold, rushing under the cabin doors, spreading fast across the carpeted hallway. We finally reached a railing near one of the main decks, clutching it alongside dozens of strangers who all wore the same expression of raw fear. The ship tilted so far that the horizon outside looked vertical, a wall of water looming higher than anything I thought possible. Every impact made the metal under our feet shriek, like the vessel itself was crying out. I remember gripping Leah's arm so tight that she yelped, but neither of us dared let go. It felt like the only thing keeping us tethered to reality was that railing. The blackout stretched on, broken only by the weak glow of emergency lights that flickered sporadically, never enough to see clearly. Somewhere deeper inside, alarms wailed in uneven bursts, then cut out abruptly. I kept thinking about how no one had prepared us for this. Cruises had safety drills, sure, but nothing about standing in darkness while waves tossed the ship like a toy. Each second felt like it might be the last before something gave way, before we were all swallowed whole. Hours blurred together in that chaos. Time didn't move normally. It stretched and warped with every groan of the ship's frame. At some point, Leah whispered, "We're not making it out of this." And I couldn't bring myself to argue. I just pressed my forehead against the cold metal railing and listened to the water slam and recede, over and over like the countdown to something final. I thought about my parents, about the ridiculous decision to save money on this trip, about how no one on land even knew what we were going through in that exact moment. When the storm finally eased, it wasn't a gradual calm. It was like the sea suddenly exhaled. The violent shudders became dull tremors. The crashing turned into uneasy lapping, and for the first time in hours, silence spread across the decks. Emergency lights flicked back on, revealing pale faces and soaked clothes. People clung to each other like survivors of a shipwreck, even though we were technically still afloat. I remember releasing the railing and being surprised my arms still worked, every muscle stiff from holding on. The crew eventually guided us back toward the interior, though most of the hallways were ankle-deep in water. Cabin doors hung crooked on their frames, and belongings floated past like debris in a flooded basement. Leah and I stumbled into our room to find our beds overturned, the ceiling tiles sagging from leaks. The air smelled like salt and diesel, sharp and heavy, sticking to my lungs with each breath. I don't think I slept at all that night. I just sat upright, waiting for the ship to start shaking again. The next morning, we learned that the storm had changed course so suddenly that the captain had no choice but to ride it out. Some people called him reckless, others called him a hero, but none of that mattered to me. What mattered was that the ship had held barely, and that I had stared at the ocean in its most violent form, and lived to tell about it. I remember watching the sunrise from the deck, the horizon calm and golden, as if the nightmare hours before had been a hallucination. But the warped metal railings and shattered windows were proof it had been real. Even now, years later, I can still feel that night whenever I hear strong winds outside my apartment, or when I walk past a building creaking in bad weather. It's not just the memory of fear, it's the helplessness, the realization that you're at the mercy of forces far bigger than yourself. That trip was supposed to be carefree and cheap, just another story from college. Instead, it left me with a memory I can't shake, of clinging to cold metal in the dark, waiting for the sea to decide whether I would live or not.